Well, thank you for joining us for ONLA Webinars. Today we have a great webinar for you, Identification and Control of Ornamental Diseases in the Nursery, a focus on perennial and woody ornamental production with Nancy Rechcigl. So Nancy, go ahead, take it away.
Okay, let's see. All right, well, good morning, everybody. Today we're going to talk a little bit about how to identify some of the problems that you might be seeing in your nursery. And our focus today is going to be on greenhouse and perennial crops. So correct identification is really critical because without a correct identification, you can't put a proper control measure in place. And so it is kind of important to know what you're looking for. Diseases can often be mistaken for other problems like spray injury, foliar nematodes, sunburn, and other disease problems. So it is important to get as much information about what's going on with the crop as possible. So further detective work is often needed. There are some important questions also that you have to ask when you're trying to determine what's going on with the plant. The first one is how much of the crop is affected. Is it the entire bed, certain sections? Typically, phyto or a cultural issue like nutritional issues are more uniform across a crop, while a disease problem usually is more sporadically seen throughout the crop, at least at first. When did the problem appear? Did it appear overnight? Well, then it's not usually a disease. A change in weather, some environmental factors. Usually a disease takes a while to progress, so it starts and then it slowly continues to build across the crop. So that could be important. Is there a pattern that's evident? Often there's damage in a crop that's in the top, but not in the lower part of the canopy. Is it along an edge of a bed? Those can give us clues as to what's going on. Then, of course, was something recently applied to the crop? And also, what about the fertilizer injector and what's being used to fertilize the crop? I've gotten a lot of diagnostic Zoom pictures and texts from growers out there that are having issues, but oftentimes it's really nutrient related and not disease related. So, for example, what's causing this problem? Well, the first question, how much of the crop is affected? If you look at the picture on the right, you see that it's somewhat sporadic with the petunias on the right-hand side. So that's most likely a disease problem, and it is. The picture on the left, you see kind of uniform chlorosis going on, and that's a nutritional issue. So again, you can kind of see some differences there. Is there a pattern? Oftentimes phyto from a spray or physical injury because of a spray, even cold water can cause some damage to foliage. You'll get some spotting, but is it a disease? Ooh, so sorry. Is it a disease or is it phyto? So if you look on the picture to the right, that is actually some Cercospora, some fungal leaf spots coming into this crop. If you look at the picture to the left, you'll see that there's also some spotting on the upper part that has a white appearance. Usually diseases have a very distinct margin. This one also does, but the tissue is chlorotic. And you can see that there's a lot of extra spotting over here on this upper foliage just on one side. So that would be caused by a spray. The physical signs and symptoms can also provide some tips for solving problems. So I have these listed into two groups. The ones listed in group 1 are fairly easy to identify because of the physical signs. The ones listed in group 2 can be a little trickier, and we hope to cover a lot of these today.
Nancy,
yes,
we cannot see your slides.
Uh-oh.
Is there maybe a button?
Did you not see them at all?
No, we can see your face.
Oh dear. Okay. So let me get out and let me get back in. Can you see the first slide? Okay. Can you see me now? Can you see me at all?
Yeah, I can see your face, but not your slideshow.
Can you see it now? Oh, Can you hit? Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's all right. We'll get it figured
Okay,
out.
here you go. Can you see it now?
There you go. Awesome.
All right, perfect. Okay. Well, let me go now to. Okay, so let me just page through. So I ended here. Oh, I apologize. Okay, so these were the groups that I was telling you about. The ones on the left in group 1 are fairly easy to identify because of the physical signs of the disease and the pathogen, where the ones listed in group 2 can be a little bit more difficult to identify, but we're going to try to cover some of these today. It's also important to know when these problems are going to start showing up in the nursery or greenhouse. And so if you look on the right-hand side under the disease problems, you see that in the spring, obviously it's cooler temperatures. You're going to run into issues perhaps with botrytis, downy mildew. Obviously, leaf spots can happen any time of the year. Once you start getting into late spring or summer, you may begin to see signs of rusts and powdery mildew. And the list goes on. So you should just know when things are going to could potentially be a problem so that you are prepared. So let's start with rust. That's really the most easiest disease to recognize because of the blister-like pustules that you see on the foliage. They're quite colorful. They're usually orange or reddish in color. And when you rub your finger on the undersides, a lot of the spores will actually come off on your finger, so you can actually see them. This is an obligate parasite. They like to infect living material. And the first indication of rust may be these chlorotic or yellow spots that you see on the upper side of the foliage. And then if you turn that leaf over, you will notice corresponding to those spots, the pustules on the underside. So the environmental conditions that favor rust are typically seen in late spring or summer, early summer, and then also again, late summer and into the fall is when we typically see our rust problems occur. It is important to note that only 4.5 hours of moisture is really needed for that rust spore to germinate and create an infection. So keeping the foliage dry as possible, anything you can do to reduce the humidity, increase air circulation can help with the rust. Now, there's a lot of perennials that can be infected with rust. I put a list here for the woodies. Obviously, you have the quince, pines, hawthorns, also can be affected by rust. But knowing which crops are potential problems, you can be prepared with getting a treatment on before you have an issue. Preventing diseases actually ends up being a lot more economical than trying to control them once they appear. So there are a lot of fungicides that are registered for control of rust, and you see them there. And I have the FRAC group listed over to the left because that is a good way to help you prepare your fungicide rotation. I typically like to have at least 3 different FRAC groups in a rotation for a particular problem. And so you can see by utilizing that, you can kind of structure your program so that you have some good resistance management strategy as well. So you see the M group here with the daconil, diethane. We have a combination with daconil and Banner, which is Concert 2, a great product. Then you have some thiophanate methyl, which has activity. You have the group 3s, FRAC group 3. Those typically have very good activity on the rusts. And then the 11 and 7-11 group are also quite strong on rust. So having a rotation, you may start with something in the M category and then move to maybe a combo, an M+3 or a 7-11, and then back to a 3 in order to have a robust program. Now, prior to having a problem, knowing that you have the right environmental conditions for rust, you can get your fungicide applications on a 14 to 21 day interval. But then if you have a problem, that's when you need to shorten that interval down to 7 days. So you're kind of best getting something on preventatively to keep it out rather than trying to fight the battle once it comes in. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about some of these newer products that you may not be aware of. I mentioned Concert 2. It is a broad spectrum fungicide that is composed of 2 active ingredients, are chlorothalonil, which is in Daconil, and also propiconazole, which is Banner. And what we have found that putting these 2 together, we had to do some special formulations, but it enhances both of the activity of both products, and we actually see better and longer control with Concert than using the 2 separately. So it is a convenient premix and can be a great rotational tool to use with the other 7-11s and the 3s. We also have MURAL, and you may be more familiar with Heritage, but MURAL we brought out a few years ago. It's a broad spectrum fungicide that controls both foliar diseases as well as stem and root rots. It does contain the active ingredient azoxystrobin, which is in our Heritage product, but we added to it a very strong SDHI called solatinol. And what we get with that is longer disease protection and even a broad array of diseases. So this is registered for use in nursery and greenhouse, on ornamentals as well as some vegetables. You see the spray rates versus drench rates are listed there. So again, it really, by putting the solatinol in with the azoxystrobin, if you love Heritage, you're going to love MURAL even more because it just works better and it lasts a bit longer as well. We get over 50 diseases that's controlled, both as sprays and as drenches. Since it does contain azoxystrobin, which is systemic, we do get the same systemic protection that we've enjoyed with Heritage. Now, one of the best features about this is its activity on rust. And, Heritage by itself is very good on rust, as are a lot of the 11 and 7 products. But the solatinol component actually is extremely strong on rust. So this is a great product for that. You see on the bottom, this is the amount of active ingredient that you need to control rust. And here it's at 80%. You can see other products, fluoxypyroxad and other SDHI. That's the one that is in Orchestra, and then penthiopyrad. You're not getting that same level of control until you get up to much higher doses. So we do see some very strong control with MURAL for rust. It provides preventative protection as well as curative. It does inhibit spores from germinating, and it will penetrate into the foliage so that if the infection has already started, it stops the mycelium from growing. And just to share some data with you on this, you can see here MURAL at the low rate of 4 and then the higher rate at 7, pretty much flatlining on this Coleosporum rust on Solidago. You have thiophanate methyl here showing some reduction, 15% disease. And then here's Concert, again, another strong product for rust, and Daconil. Daconil also works great on rust. This is on daylily rust. And actually, the interesting thing about this trial was that it was applied as a spray and as a drench, again, because of the systemic activity with MURAL, which is kind of unusual and something somewhat different compared to the other 7-11 products. we get really excellent control of rust as a drench. So you see here's MURAL applied as a drench directly to the soil. And here this was an over-the-top drench to the soil versus a spray. We had Pageant in here as a comparison as a spray, and you can see we get really excellent protection. So for daylily rust, you know, daylilies are difficult to spray because of all the foliage. So really a drench application is all that you need. Okay, let's move on to powdery mildew. Powdery mildew is another obligate parasite that affects bedding plants, perennials, and woodies. It's always recognized by the white, fluffy mycelial growth that you see on the foliage. And you see in some cases it may be sparse, in other cases it might look quite dense, but it also may look different on different crops. So you can see here on aster, you get the very distinct telltale growth of the mycelial patches. But here on sedum, it looks quite different. It almost looks like edema. So this is actually caused by a powdery mildew on sedum, but you can see it looks quite a bit different. This is on aquilegia. Again, not your typical indications of powdery mildew. You see these red blotchy areas on the foliage, and then there is mycelial growth over those as time goes on. You can see some very sparse areas here, but really it's the reddening that pops out with aquilegia. So if you see this, this is not a leaf spot or a nutritional deficiency. This is actually powdery mildew. And in some cases, it can really cause quite a bit of distortion if it's left to go and not controlled. The bottom picture over here is on rose, and you have a lot of leaf distortion and yellowing. The plants become stunted, don't grow properly. So it does usually need to be controlled. There is a huge list of ornamentals, perennials, and woodies and annuals that are prone to powdery mildew. And so you can see the list there. I've got the woody list. And again, just knowing what crops can be affected by certain problems helps you, because then you can say, okay, I can get a program together for these crops and I can be prepared. Now, powdery mildew is very crop specific. There are different fungi that are in the powdery mildew family, if you will. And so different plants can be affected by certain ones. You see rose can be affected by Sphaerotheca. There's dogwood, that's in 2 categories here. And then there's a huge group of Erysiphe where there's a lot of ornamentals that can be affected by that particular one. Now, although they're very crop specific, the one thing they do have in common is the environmental conditions. They don't require a lot of humidity, but somewhere around 70%, 75% is really enough to get the powdery mildew fungi germinating and creating infections. They do prefer generally some cooler temperatures. I have here 62 to 72. I mean, it can go up higher to 80, but generally when you start to get very high temperatures up, by 90, they don't tend to be as much of an issue. Although there's some powdery mildews like salvia powdery mildew that can tolerate those hot temperatures and they grow perfectly fine. But generally, it's usually the moderate temperatures. So with powdery mildew, again, there are similar group of fungicides that work very well on powdery mildew problems. You see the list here. Again, the FRAC group 3 is very strong on powdery mildew. So it's important to not overuse those or the 11-7 groups strictly. It's important to get some of the multi-site fungicides incorporated into your rotation as well. So a suggestion would be, again, starting with a multi-site product over here, going to something maybe like a Concert, going to the 7-11 group, and then back to a FRAC code 3 before returning to the rotation. I do have Palladium listed here It's highlighted a little differently because that fungicide is more of a broad spectrum fungicide, great on leaf spots, but it also does have some good control of powdery mildew fungi. So that's another one that you can incorporate into the rotation as well. And just to show you some data, this was a trial that was conducted out in Tennessee on crepe myrtle. If you grow crepe myrtle, you know that powdery mildew is definitely a pathogen of that crop. And so you can see the performance of both the 7-11 fungicides. Here's Concert at different rates. And these applications were made on a 14-day interval, keeping that population from developing. So getting a fungicide on 14 to 21 days prior, to any significant pressure, and then kind of keeping it going can do a lot to keep the disease out of the crop. This is on garden phlox. Again, you can see the good performance of all these products when it comes to controlling powdery mildew. Again, these were done on a 14-day interval. This is a new trial from actually we got in last year. Powdery mildew, obviously on phlox, is a big problem. You can see the untreated control here at 81% infection is quite high. We do have a new fungicide in development that you'll be hearing about more in 2021 once that gets registered, and that has some good performance as well. Again, really good performance with the FRAC group 3s. Here's Concert and MURAL also doing quite well. This was on dogwood powdery mildew, looking at fungicide applications with palladium. And I don't know if you can see here, but this, where the arrow is pointing, is the untreated control. So you can see how stunted that plant is with all the white mycelium on the not very expanded foliage that you see there. Trial was done with a 7-day versus a 14-day, and you can see, a 14-day interval works quite well with these fungicides. So just a little bit about palladium, if this is a new product that you're hearing about for the first time. It does contain 2 active ingredients. It contains fludeoxonil, which is in medallion, as well as another fungicide, cyprotonil, which is really a new AI for the ornamental market. There's no other product that has cyprotonil in it for ornamentals. And it does provide some broad spectrum activity, putting the 2 together both systemically and also with some contact protection as well. It is particularly strong on botrytis, but it also works well on a lot of the leaf spot diseases. So it makes it a nice rotational tool because of the differences in the FRAC groups. So how palladium works is the fludeoxonil component actually provides protection on the outside of the plant, inhibiting spores from germinating and penetrating into the plant tissue, while the cyprotonil component actually penetrates into that tissue and stops the mycelium from growing internally. And so that's why it does work well with powdery mildew because of that. So here is kind of the disease list that you get when you use palladium. You can see, again, both products are very strong on botrytis. So in the wintertime or fall, when you may be having issues with that, really great product to use at that time, but a really nice list of foliar diseases that you get with this product. Also sclerotinia control, some of the stem diseases and crown rots are on this label as well. So you can get a nice rotation here using the different FRAC codes that you see there. Let's move on to downy mildew. I know a lot of you probably grow some roses out there, and downy mildew is another one that can be a real problem, not just on roses, but on a lot of perennials as well. So typically, the first indications of downy mildew are these yellow areas that you see on the leaves, these patches that are usually confined by the veins. And then later, this tissue can turn more of a reddish color as the tissue starts to degrade more and collapse. Usually the sporulation is seen on the undersides of these areas that are discolored. And if you flip the leaf over, you'll see the mycelium, maybe kind of a white, gray color, or purplish, depending upon what the plant is. Generally, downy mildews prefer cooler temperatures. So this is a problem that we look for in the spring and, early summer, rearing its head. You can also have issues with it in the fall. This is downy mildew on Veronica. And so when you first look at it, you might think, I have spray injury, or do I have some foliar nematodes? Because when I look, I see that the necrosis is banded between those veins. So, but if you turn it over, you will likely see, if the conditions are fairly humid, the sporulation that occurs on the undersides corresponding to those necrotic patches. This is on viburnum over here on the left. Looks a little strange. This was something I see in Florida. Was kind of surprised to me. It's on the shiny leaf viburnum. It's more of a tropical southern plant. And when I first saw it, I wasn't quite sure what it was because it looked kind of weird. It didn't really follow the same pattern that I was used to seeing. But again, you never surprised by some of these downy mildews. And here on coleus, it looks like sunburn or maybe spray burn, because you see this kind of bleached out area on coleus. So downy mildew doesn't always look the same on every crop. This is also on a viburnum, not the shiny leaf viburnum, but actually this is in my own yard. And I thought I was getting some Cercospora, and I do have some Cercospora leaf spots developing here on the viburnum. But what was interesting to me is when I turned it over, I actually did see some sporulation in some of these spots. So what initially looked like a leaf spot or disease ended up also having some downy mildew there as well. So again, like powdery mildew, there are several fungal pathogens that will cause downy mildew, and you see kind of them listed there, but they are fairly crop specific, staying within kind of a family. But again, it's the environmental conditions that kind of tie them all together. So here's your list of perennials that would be prone to downy mildew. And again, in the springtime, it's important to keep a close watch out and get your fungicide rotations on early so that this doesn't develop, because trying to control downy mildew once it has established a foothold in the crop takes a lot longer, a lot more fungicide applications, and sometimes it's not totally successful. So your tools for controlling downy mildew are really many. There's a lot of good products that are available for controlling downy mildew, many of them providing systemic activity like Subdue and Adorn. Both very strong, can be applied as a spray or as a drench. You've got the FRAC group 33, the phosphites and phosphonates here that also work well and can be incorporated into rotation. Segway as a spray has activity on downy mildew, but not as a drench. So that could be incorporated into a spray program. You also have FRAC group 40 here. So there's a number of products in FRAC group 40. These products tend to have translaminar activity. So they bind and then they move down into the tissue, helping to control the downy mildew that way. And then one of the newest products on the market is Segovis. That is a systemic fungicide from a totally new FRAC group that we've not had before. So that offers very nice systemic control, but also nice resistance management strategy with that FRAC group. And then of course you have the multi-site, the Dithane, the Mancozebs, Protect, And then the 11 and 7-11 groups also have activity on downy mildew, as well as other fungal pathogens. So those are important to incorporate into rotation, because you're not always going to be just fighting downy mildew in these crops. You have other fungal pathogens at your leaf spots and such, powdery mildew perhaps, that you're going to have to control. So the 7-11 group also becomes an important part of your rotation. So for those of you that haven't heard about Segovis, that is really the newest systemic fungicide group, well, fungicide to hit the oomycete group. It is very specific for downy mildew and Phytophthora diseases. So it's an oomycete product, and it is systemic. So you can spray it or drench it, and you will get excellent control. It is in the FRAC group 49. It's in a new class of chemistry called isoxazolines. The active ingredient is called oxythiopiperlin, kind of a big word, but it is new chemistry for our ornamental market. So again, provides a nice resistance management tool to incorporate into the products that we already have. Use rates are quite low, 1 to 2.4 ounces. Can be used very effectively, and it does have some broad labeling for uses in the greenhouse nursery and even in commercial landscapes. Now, one of the interesting features of this fungicide is that it will move upward with sprays. So you don't have to just drench it with the spray, but if you spray it and you wet the stem, and the stem is a green stem, it will get absorbed and continue to move up and protect the tissue, the new growth that wasn't there at the time that you sprayed it. So to illustrate this, this was a study that was conducted in the UK on tomatoes, where they sprayed it and they put a mark here to show the size of the plant when the first and only application was made on the tomatoes. Then it was repeatedly infected with Phytophthora infestans. Every 5 to 7 days, it was re-inoculated to see how strong this would hold up. And you can see here, this is 34 days after the initial application. And while you do see a little bit of the disease, that plant is still growing quite strong and is still protected. But I did mention that it was systemic and you can drench it. So this was a trial where we looked at comparing it with Subdue. We know that you can drench Subdue and it will move up into the rows and provide protection with the drench. And Segovis does the same thing. We looked at both the 1 ounce rate versus a 3 ounce rate. And here's Subdue Max at 2 ounces. So you see some very good control there with a drench application as opposed to sprays. Now we know it's difficult to get drenches on when you have several acres of roses or crops that need to be drenched. So you can use this in spray rotation as well. And here we actually looked at a rotation program on a 7 versus a 14-day interval. And we started with Subdue as a spray. And you should note that if you're using Subdue as a spray, you have to mix it with another fungicide that does have activity on downy mildew. So you can mix it, we mixed it with Macora. You can mix it with a Mancozeb product, that's fine. Adorn has the same labeling on that label, and that is really for resistance management purposes. We know as a drench, when you drench it, you're going to get some really great movement throughout the plant canopy as a drench, but as a spray, sometimes this can be limited and you can be more prone to having resistance develop with sprays. So that is listed on the label. So here we put it with Macora, and then we rotated with MURAL for other issues that you might have, such as Cercospora leaf spot, powdery mildew, rust. We put in Segovis, back to MURAL, and we did a rotation on a 7 to 14-day interval, and you can see it was quite effective. 14 days, get it on early. You probably could stretch it out to 21. Many of these products do have some longer control that they provide. Okay, moving on to some fungal leaf spot diseases. These can be a problem and more difficult to identify because they can look different on different crops. They come in different shapes and sizes. But generally for fungal leaf spots, what you should note is that they do have very distinct margins. If you look down here at the bottom on the Cornespora leaf spot, you can see how the dark red area around that leaf spot. Here, Cercospora, similar. You sometimes get very dark brown or dark red area around that leaf spot. You may also have concentric rings as that leaf spot is expanding. You'll see the tissue start to show these concentric ring spots. So that's a really good indication that it's a fungal pathogen and not phyto. You may also see reproductive structures within the leaf spot. So you may see tissue that's white or tan, and then inside, I know it's quite small, but in here you can see some little black peppery spots within that, and that's the reproductive structures of the pathogen. So there are a number of fungal pathogens that can cause leaf spots. I have some here listed, but really kind of impossible to go through all of them. This is Entomosporium getting started on India hawthorn. The appearance, again, will be based on the pathogen and the crop. The important thing to remember is that the conditions that favor leaf spots are really wet foliage and high humidity. Poor air movement. So we tend to see these, dew from changes in temperature from daytime to nighttime. The dew that's left on the foliage is enough to allow these pathogens to germinate and penetrate and start causing problems. So anything you can do to eliminate the wet foliage, water early in the day, provide some good spacing, especially if you're in a greenhouse or even if you're out in the field. Good spacing lets that air go around so the foliage will dry a little bit faster. Just some common ones that you may encounter on some of the crops that you may be growing, but this is on salvia, Myrothecium. And Myrothecium gets on several perennials. But one of the things you may note if you have a hand lens, that the fruiting structures on Myrothecium look a bit different. They're not the black peppery spots that you typically see, but they have they're black, but they also have like a Oreo cookie type effect, because you see this white component to this reproductive structure. So it looks like a dark top with white coming out of it, almost like you've squished an Oreo cookie. And that's very indicative of Myrothecium. So if you happen to see that, that's a good clue that you have an issue with Myrothecium. Again, hydrangea can get both Cercospora and Cornespora on their leaves. They have kind of a complex. Luckily, the fungicides that are available do control both, so that's helpful. But again, you see these very dark red spots. So again, the list, large list for controlling fungal pathogens. Getting things on early certainly helps. So something like Daconil or the diethane, especially if you're in a nursery situation, those products tend to stick and stay. They do have residue, but they have residue for a reason, because they do provide that long-lasting protection out in the field and really, will hold up with a rain event. So using the M's, the multi-site fungicides, can be really quite helpful. They're very reasonably priced. You've got thiophanate methyl. You've got iprodium in Chipco, also a great leaf spot fungicide. Palladium, you saw the list there. Medallion, which is also in palladium, so you would choose one of them, you wouldn't use both. And then again, your 7-11 group provide the really strong control. So again, nice rotation. They're kind of moving through your frac groups. Again, try a 14 to 21 day interval. We're getting well, we're already in winter. I guess it's December already. I'm in Florida, but it's getting chilly here too. You're getting cooler temperatures. So warmer days, cooler nights, you get that dew forming on the foliage of the nursery crops. You know, get these things on and get protected. So just some data here. I told you Cercospora and Corynespora were two of the real significant ones, at least on hydrangea. You can see here some good performance with MURAL, Concert, and Palladium. Some of the fungicides that I discussed earlier today. You can see that, 40% control. You have 40, disease at 40%, you're not going to be able to sell that crop. Here's Corynespora. Again, great protection here with these products. Getting them on a 14-day interval. You don't have to get them on a 7. These newer products now are really providing longer control. Black spot. This is one that if you're growing roses can be a real problem. It causes these very dark tar-like spots on the foliage, and you can see that the margin, instead of having a very distinct margin like I've spoke about before with other fungal pathogens, this one has a feathery margin. If you look, it looks a little feathery there. But generally leaves that are infected turn yellow, they'll drop, and once this gets started, it can be a real problem on roses. Again, more trials on rose, again, looking at different rates of MURAL. Here's Orchestra, another 7-11. So the 7-11's providing good control. Here's Eagle, FRAC group 3. Again, great protection. These have all been applied on a 14-day interval. This was a trial we conducted last year. Again, we do have a new fungicide coming that is really excellent on black spot. So we're really excited about that. It'll be a nice new tool for you to incorporate in the rotation. But again, you see some good control with the MURAL, the Concert, and Daconil. Daconil is great on black spot. Concert has Banner in it, not as much of the Daconil. So you have kind of a combination product there. Can be a problem with some phyto on certain varieties of roses, particularly during the hot summer months, but getting it on earlier in the spring, it can be used usually with no problem, and especially if the temperatures and humidity are not very high. For those of you that grow some boxwood out there, boxwood blight has been a real problem, starting to develop more in the nursery situation. And you can see some great tools here for controlling boxwood blight. Really one of the strongest ones that we've seen for a while is the Daconil. Daconil provides some incredible control of this disease and really some long-lasting protection. This was a trial that was done back in 2014 at Virginia Tech, and these applications were applied on a 2-week interval. This was a trial that was done 3 years later, and again, looking at some other products, and you can see here, here's Daconil. Okay, so these fungicides were applied on a 2-week interval and keeping the plants look really, really nice. But then 5 weeks later, after no fungicides had been applied, that's the real test. And so you can see here, Daconil is still a clear winner here, providing excellent residual control. Here we've got Pageant and MURAL also working really well, providing that residual activity that you need. You're going to need to use MURAL at the 7-ounce rate as opposed to the 4-ounce rate, but you can see some really nice protection there. For those of you that grow junipers, Cavatina tip blight and Phomopsis can often be a problem on these crops, and so what's really important is to get the fungicides on in early spring, because you tend to see the problems show up a little bit later. Generally, the tips start to turn brown. You may see some black fruiting bodies in this area. It's usually the new young shoots that are affected. And the infections do occur in the spring from the fungus releasing the spores from previously infected areas. So anything you can do to prune these out during the year will certainly help. And then get your protected fungicides on early in the spring. I'm talking March, February, if your conditions allow it. I think I'm talking to Oklahoma people, so maybe it would be March for you, depending upon when you thaw out from the winter. But definitely remove any dead material from the previous year, and you have a nice rotation with these products. A few applications in the spring can really prevent this from happening. So let's move on a little bit to root and stem diseases. Just going to touch on this briefly, but you see the culprits here that can cause problems with your root and stem rots. And there's nothing worse than transplanting a dianthus and then have it wither out, you know, within 4 weeks after planting it in the field. So generally with root and stem rots, when you have a problem below ground, you're going to see the symptoms above ground. So I believe this is a spirea looking quite chlorotic, and you can see not just yellowing, but also some reddening, indicating some nutrient deficiency as well. So the nutrient deficiency and the chlorotic foliage was being caused by no roots. So periodically, especially when you have the bigger material, take a look at the root system to see what's going on below that container, because in this case, the roots were just were gone. And so you're not only going to see a nutrient deficiencies because it can't pick up the nutrients it needs, but eventually you're going to have a dead plant. I mentioned dianthus. You know, I can't tell you how many times I've seen this planted where, you know, it goes out there, it's transplanted in the fall, and then, you know, it doesn't root out, it withers. And this is usually due to a problem with the root system. So drench your liners before you transplant. If you don't want to drench the plants in the field, drench the liners before you transplant them to try to give them some protection before you put them out. If you're growing lavender, you may run into some issues with Phytophthora. This can cause not only a root infection, but also a crown and stem rot here at the base. And so this is typically what you see. This is on Monarda, and everything's green except this one yellow stem. And so if you take the pot out and you take a look at it closely, this whole area of the pot had a root issue. The roots were rotten, they were gone. You did have good roots on this side, so you didn't lose the whole plant, but you can definitely see the correlation between no roots and what that foliage is going to look like. Here's another nursery problem. Again, the top growth is looking really bad. This taxus, the grow time on it is quite long. And so you do have to be careful in the field, because if you are prone to water standing or pooling, you can develop problems with Phytophthora and not even know it. And then I'll go back to that picture. You know, you've had the plant for 2 years, you're getting ready to sell it, and then all of a sudden it starts to go down. And that's because Phytophthora moved up from the roots into that lower stem and is slowly shutting off the water supply to that upper canopy. Now, you've got a lot of money invested in a crop like this, so it is important. Anything you can do to watch the water logging in your nursery is important. So again, avoid planting too deeply. That can create problems. Avoiding prolonged saturated media, particularly if you're getting flooding in the field. I know this happens quite a bit. Try to also watch your soluble salt level, because this can cause root tips to be injured. So here's a situation where again, the foliage was not looking very good on the top. It's like, okay, let's take a look and see what's going on. And when we see the lower part of the stem, we actually see these fruiting bodies here, and this is indicative of fusarium. And sure enough, when you cut into that stem, you can see the vascular discoloration that you get with fusarium infections. We then cut up another one that looked fairly good. It had more of a canopy. This is a dogwood. And we thought, okay, well, the root system wasn't that great, but the top growth was still okay. And when we cut into that, this one actually had Phytophthora coming up. So it hadn't knocked out the top yet, but again, this is what can happen if your plants are prone to flooding in the field. So we've got a good list here for fungicides for both Phytophthora and for Pythium. You know, these are the ones that really work on Phytophthora, and then you've got the other 7-11 group that also have activity. They're not strictly for Phytophthora, but if you're controlling rhizocke, you're going to get some additional protection with those products as well. And the same thing with Pythium here. So just looking at a dogwood trial with Phytophthora, the new product I talked about, Segovis, some really strong, excellent activity on Phytophthora. And you can see here, MURAL 7-11, also providing some good suppression, although more for controlling rhizoctonia, you're getting some Phytophthora protection as well. Phalabiopsis is something that we run into more with some of the perennials. The plants tend to have more reduced vigor, maybe stunted, and generally the root system tends to be very dark because of these fungal structures that you see in the roots. Things that you can do is maintain a more slightly acidic pH to the planting media. Phalabiopsis likes it more on the alkaline side, so keeping that pH down in the 5.5 area, 5.8 will certainly help. This is some Coreopsis, which is very susceptible to Phalabiopsis, and you can see healthy roots here, and then the black roots. So it's different than Pythium. With Pythium infections, you get the brown roots sloughing off. With Phalabiopsis, they tend to stay intact and on the plant. So here's your list of susceptible perennials to Phalabiopsis, and just knowing this ahead of time can help you prepare and protect. Sanitation is also critically important to preventing Phalabiopsis problems in the nursery, because those spores will stay in debris that's left around the nursery. So sanitation is also critical for preventing Phalabiopsis infections. Your rotations are here, and although the list appears limited, you've got a nice, rotation of frac groups here that are quite strong. And thiophanate methyl is really one of the strongest products for controlling Phalabiopsis. So that is definitely one that you start with first. You rotate to a medallion, a firm, and then you can rotate to something like a Terragard, also has good control. So that would be kind of your rotation series for Phalabiopsis. So this was an interesting situation. These were boxwood cuttings in propagation, not rooting, starting to go down. I happened to be there on a field visit, and we went to take a look. And upon taking a closer look, I did see fusarium. These are sporodokia, reproductive structures that you get with infections of fusarium. And so it was happening really quite early. It's in propagation. So that means these cuttings came in infected. And sure enough, when we went out in the field, we did see plants that were infected, but they're harvesting cuttings from plants that they already had out in the field. So I do encourage you to do some good scouting. Be careful before you take cuttings on stuff from the field, because it's been out there and it may be previously infected and you don't know. And so for them, it was causing some quick a lot of anguish because they were losing all of their propagation. Some of the perennials that are prone to fusarium are listed here. So just keep an eye out for those. And again, the list for protecting against fusarium. So for protecting against fusarium, Medallion is a great drench for protecting. The TerraGuard, and it is more, will penetrate into that root, so provide some systemic control. You've got the 7-11 groups here, also providing some good control. And again, with the Heritage and with the MURAL, we found that actually a directed spray works best for controlling fusarium because it will penetrate into that stem tissue. Here is a trial that was done on Mandevilla, and you can see here's Medallion as a thorough drench. This was MURAL as a 7-ounce directed spray, so not a full drench to the crop, provided great control in Mandevilla. In our trials last year, we looked at garden mums, and you can see here the 7-11 group providing some good suppression. Here MURAL is working really well, and our new fungicide that's coming out next spring has some really awesome protection. So we look forward to getting that in the rotation. Just wanted to show you, if you're growing hosta, you may encounter crown rot issues. This is with Sclerotium ralphsii. This is what happens. It literally melts down in the field. And the indication of Sclerotium ralphsii are these mustard like seed-like structures, the reproductive structures that will form on the infected tissue. Now, Sclerotium ralphsii sounds very similar to Sclerotinia, but they're different, and the reproductive structures do look quite a bit different. So you get fans of white mycelium with Sclerotium ralphsii and the mustard seed. With Sclerotinia, this is more of a stem issue as opposed to a crown issue, but you get these dark sclerotia being produced on the infected stem. So they sound similar, but the reproductive structures definitely are different. Control options for both, actually quite similar for the most part. Some good options there. Typically, you don't start to control this until you see the problem, but knowing that hostas in particular can be prone to this, you may want to get some preventive fungicides on with that. And so to conclude, I just would encourage really some good resistance management when you are putting your rotations together. It is important to select 3 or 4 products from different mode of action classification groups that have activity on that problem, and put them in a rotation so that you can maintain the activity and strength of those products for future programs. It is important when you are positioning these things to look at how they have an understanding of how they perform. Are they translaminar? Are they systemic? What's the length of control you normally get? What are some of the regulatory issues that go along with the label? And then always keep good records, because if you had a problem one year, likely you may see it again the following year. And now you can be prepared to protect it. We do have a lot of really great chemistry for controlling the foliar diseases. And in this slide, I'm just showing you giving some general tips on, well, in propagation, you may want to, put something on like a daconil, which sticks and stays through the mist, or something like MURAL that will actually penetrate into the tissue in prop and also provide some additional rooting because of the plant health feature that you get with MURAL. Growing on, kind of a rotation approach. So it is important to kind of keep these things in mind when going forward with your crops. We do have on our website, Greencast Online, different solutions that have been built for different crops and different problems. So I encourage you to take a look at that. And with that, I'll say thank you for having me today. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer anything that you may have. Any questions? Let's see. I can't see the chat anymore. Summer, do we have any questions in the chat box?
Let's see. Albert wants to know, okay, Albert was just letting us know that he's watching it from a different computer.
Oh.
So, Jeff said, thank you, Nancy. Let's see. Anybody else have any questions they'd like to ask Nancy?
It's so sad that we haven't been out to do field visits this year. So, so I miss seeing everybody for sure. But if you do have any questions, feel free to contact me directly, or one of your sales reps that you may deal with in the area, and they can get questions to me as well. Okay, thanks, guys.
All right.
Have a great day and have a great season.
Thank you, Nancy, so much for your wonderful presentation. We really appreciate you.
Okay, bye.
Bye. All right, thanks for joining us, whether it's live or on demand. We appreciate you. Thanks so much. Have a good one.